Gators Breakdown episode 37. We are ready to go. New show talking about recruiting and a surprise kind of over the weekend. Mike Summers left and kind of surprised. We knew he might be looking around after there were some rumors that he interviewed at South Carolina over the couple last weeks. Some rumors were there that he was there just to assist Will Muschamp in looking for an offensive coordinator. Will Muschamp values his opinion, or if he was actually interviewing for the South Carolina job or not. So, episode 37, Florida had their first official visit weekend after the dead period. So we'll see, dive into that, and we'll see how that went for the Gators. And as I mentioned, Mike Summers as well, leaving and going to Louisville to join Bobby Petrino there. So you can just Gators Breakdown, as you know. You're either watching live or you catch the podcast on SoundCloud or iTunes. Check it out there. Share it. That's a big thing with us. Share this podcast. Share Gators Breakdown. Let everybody know where you can find this Gator Talk. A little bit of change of plans. Joey was going to join me tonight, but had some things come up, so he'll join me later in the week when we do our midweek podcast to kind of preview the next official visit weekend for the Gators. And if there's a hire, Florida has a couple positions open. So if there's a hire, Joey will dive in and share that with us as well. We're here on Gators Breakdown. You can find us on Twitter at Gators Breakdown and on Facebook, facebook.com Gators Breakdown, and on YouTube as well. So, as I mentioned, Florida had their first official visit weekend after the dead period with signing day coming up in about 3 weeks, and had some big-time players on campus. Four-star Elijah Blades, Florida commit currently. We'll dive into him a little bit. Three-star Ventrell Miller is the other Florida commit that visited as well from Lakeland. And then you also had four-star safety Devin Hunter from Virginia, four-star James Robinson. As we know, we talked a good bit about him from Lakeland. I think the big one here, four-star Levi Jones from Texas, and three-star Eric Stokes from Georgia, and four-star Cam Spence from the D.C. area committed to Maryland at this point. So Florida was able to get him on campus, even though he was committed to Maryland. So what we have here is, I think we expected maybe to get a commit or two, especially from James Robinson. That's the name we're looking for. Probably the closest guy we think right now who is leaning towards Florida. But, it's I still think he ends up at Florida, but we'll talk more about that as I'm just trying to summarize kind of what happened over the weekend. While we maybe expected to recruit a commit, we didn't get it. So James Robinson, I think, is still kind of out there. Be on the alert for that. Maybe I know Florida was really hoping to shut down his recruitment this past weekend. But as we know, Florida doesn't press too hard for commits. That's the word on the street anyway. And we'll see what happens there. With James Robinson, as I think he still ends up in this class. Elijah Blades, as we know, was the other big-time star all the way from California, Florida Gator commit. Nebraska USC still go chopping at the heels there. Looks like he had a good time. So I think those are the big two stars there that we were really looking for this past weekend to see if we could get any news out of maybe shutting down their recruitment. Shutting down their recruitment and just going ahead and pledging and sticking to the Gators. Even though Elijah Blades is committed to the Gators, a lot of people still think that he is looking hard at USC and Nebraska there as well. So let's dive into the highlight. I think it's definitely with the linebacker position. We know Levi Jones came in. He was going to be a big target for Florida. Has a history with Randy Shannon, but it looked like going into this weekend, Florida had some ground to make up with Florida State. This was the first time Jones had visited Florida's campus, and looks like Florida hit it out of the park with the visit. And I think if you follow social media, you could definitely tell the family enjoyed themselves with all the postings they made on Twitter. His mom and his dad were with him, and you could see the smiles on their faces and smile on his face, taking pictures with the national championship trophies Florida has and the Outback Bowl trophy. They got to hang out with the staff and the other players. That was big for Jones and the family there. They're kind of already comfortable with Randy Shannon, who coached Jones's father. I think during their time when Randy Shannon was in the NFL. So there were a little bit of the family knowing a Florida staffer in Randy Shannon, and I think that with that going into the good time Jones had this weekend, I really think Florida helped themselves there with Levi Jones. And, on the field, I mean, there's still a need at linebacker, which Jones likes. Look at the freshmen that played this past season. And with the losses of Anzalone and Davis, Florida can use Jones. He has a chance to come in and play early if he can prove he can be on the field. I mean, this guy's very athletic. So, Florida was able to show how also they can help players off the field. He wants to concentrate on a business degree, and UF showed him that side of things as well. So with the Florida staff kind of becoming more personal, knowing that family and seeing, proposing what they can do in the academic side as well. I think Florida really, really did some good here with Levi Jones. He even came out and said, this is his only visit so far. This was the first weekend these guys could visit. But it looked like Florida was able to nail this. He named Florida his leader. He said, and it gave it with the caveat of, this was my first, this is my first visit. So this is why why Florida is my leader. But he did really enjoy it. So Florida would have to fend off Florida State, possibly USC. There's still plenty of time left in this recruitment in this recruitment that we know. It's February 1st. That's signing day. So I'm recording this podcast on a Monday night, January 16th. We got about 2 weeks, before Florida can hang on to Jones. I think they have a good chance. I think Florida State's the team to beat here. They were the team leading going into this visit, but I don't think Florida could have done any more with his on-campus visit. So Florida will now. To do it in home, I'm sure coming up pretty soon. We'll see. Randy Shannon, maybe Jim McElwain will go do that, and we'll see if Florida can really reel in Jones and see where it goes from there. Also, another player they're trying to get the attention of and maybe kind of pull a surprise is safety Devin Hunter. He used his first visit to go to Florida, and he's going to shut down his recruitment January 20th. So like I said, I'm recording this January 16th, so we should know something in a few days. Virginia Tech is by far the biggest, threat that Florida will have to look for. I mean, they showed Hunter what he could do. I mean, Florida's known as DBU. He even mentioned that Florida is known as DBU. He really enjoyed his visit to Gainesville. There's not too many hints that he may choose Florida over Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's probably still the team to beat here, but we can read reports and everything, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm as connected, too connected to the Florida recruiting side of things. So maybe Florida did enough to impress him. Florida, and we've seen it in the NFL this past week. Brian Poole, Keanu Neal, both of them sit there playing for the Atlanta Falcons. Florida has a lot they can show him. Florida has a lot, we know about Florida's DB situation. We know Tabor, Wilson, Poole, May, all these guys from the past few years that have gone on to play in the NFL and are going to play in the NFL. Florida has plenty to offer this guy, and I'm sure Florida gave him plenty to think about coming up. And maybe Florida can pull it out under from Virginia Tech and pull Devin Hunter in. So next player we're going to talk about James Robinson. I've talked about him last week on the podcast, how much his big receiver size frame would be a good fit for Florida. I really think Florida is going to be the team that's very hard to beat for Robinson. We know Oklahoma, Ole Miss will throw their names in the hat, and he'll definitely give those guys a look now. Oklahoma is still considered the biggest competition. He visited them back in December. But playing in state, I think, is what runs out for Robinson. Look out for Ohio State, who's lost a commitment at the wide receiver position. I think they'll try and throw something his way. We know the Lakeland pipeline, Urban Meyer had his days from Florida. So it would not surprise me one bit to see him maybe drop, if he's not serious about Oklahoma or Ole Miss, drop one of he's not going to visit Oklahoma again, I don't think. So maybe he does throw in a visit to Ohio State. They're trying to get him on the visit. Nothing's official as of now, so we'll see what Robinson does there. If he never takes that visit, I think Florida has to feel even more confident that he will choose the Gators. Kerry Dixon, he wanted to get to know Kerry Dixon a little bit more with his visit on this past trip. Torian Gray was his main recruiter, so he didn't really get to hang out with Kerry Dixon as much. That would be his position coach, of course. But Torian Gray is from Lakeland. That would be his main recruiter as well. So no harm, no foul there. But James Robinson really wanted to get to know Kerry Dixon. You saw them at the basketball game together this past weekend. There was a picture James Robinson posted there at the basketball game. But 6'3", 195. Florida needs to do 195 to 200 pounds. You see his weight kind of fluctuate between those on different reports and different websites. So we'll see. Big target Florida, I think, can definitely use at the wide receiver position. Guy who can just get the ball would be very exciting to see. We've seen Florida last couple of years. Antonio Callaway, Tyree Cleveland. Hey, freshmen will play. Freshmen will play in this offense. And Jim McElwain's proven that time and time again. And I'm sure that's a big selling point there. So I think that's the three big stories I wanted to concentrate on after this past official visit weekend. Like I mentioned, Eric Stokes came out of Georgia. I think Florida impressed on his visit as well. I don't think there might be running out of room at the defensive back position. If Blades doesn't stick, Stokes maybe gets a spot on this Gators secondary board. I don't think there's much room for him now, but we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. He's a good talent. He definitely wouldn't be a disappointment if Florida was to get him. It's just I think there's guys higher on the Florida board right now. Gators Breakdown. Thanks for listening for us. You can catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube as well. And if you're checking it out on YouTube, that's live right now. So thank you for joining live here. So the other big story we'll dive into is Mike Summers. Kind of surprised Saturday when we saw that around kind of right before the basketball game, I believe it came out, or during the basketball game, that offensive line coach Mike Summers is going to leave Florida, head back to Louisville where he previously coached. Kind of caught us off guard a little bit, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this podcast. I don't necessarily think I'm torn. I defend the coaches a little bit more than most. I see the faults in Mike Summers, but I also see kind of what the hand he was dealt. This is a young offensive line, injury-riddled offensive line this past fall. I think my biggest complaint, and if you listen to the podcast during the season, was my lack of fire at times from the offensive line. The offense in general was so lackadaisical that it just didn't feel right. And while I thought Summers was an okay coach and an okay recruiter, this offensive line class that's coming into this Gator recruiting class now looks to be pretty good. So I don't necessarily think his leaving will hurt too bad. I know Chandler, I think it was the offensive lineman from Georgia, who after the Summers departure canceled his visit to Florida and committed to Louisville. So there was one player I think who was impressed with Mike Summers, but we also have Leon Herbert out there. He says his plan will not change. He said Jim McElwain told him that he would like the next hire. McElwain will also start to recruit him a little bit more as Summers is out. Randy Shannon's been his lead recruiter, of course, down there in South Florida. So I don't necessarily think it'll hurt with Leon Herbert. Florida will get a visit, of course, and the final official visit. Most people think he will not stay with his commitment to Michigan and commit to Florida. But Florida's offensive line board right now, I think you have to be impressed with, and Mike Summers is part to blame for that. He gets if you blame him for the bad, you got to blame him for the good as well. So we'll see. I think it stays there. TJ Moore, big time guy. Kadeem Telford, those are good talents coming in on the offensive line. So, but Florida, of course, flip Leon Herbert. I don't necessarily think Mike Summers hurts there. So, of course, the next biggest question is what happens at the offensive line coaching position now that Mike Summers is gone? There's a few names floating out there. 24/7 did a good list there. I'll use their list as kind of a template for where we can go with this. We all know. I was reporting it last week, and if you follow on Twitter, the whole drama with Mike Locksley, how close he was to being on this Florida staff, and with everything that kind of happened with Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, and Mario Cristobal getting the offensive coordinator position at Oregon. Some spots opened up for Mike Locksley to stay at Alabama. He was really, really close to coming to Florida, and we kind of just see what happened there. He chose to stay at Alabama with an increased offensive role, an on-field role. You can't blame him. I mean, Alabama's the program right now. So he probably looks at seeing that's his best chance to get back to an upper echelon type of coaching situation for him. And I think the other thing you can look for is maybe Tim Skipper, the running backs coach, maybe shift him to linebackers coach. And we'll see how this kind of works out. Where, with Tim Skipper, see if they shift him to the other side of the ball. And now with the departure of Mike Summers, Florida has some openings on the staff as far as Jeff Collins leaving, Randy Shannon getting promoted to defensive coordinator. Now Mike Summers leaving as well. So going into some names, I think we can see here Jeff Stoutland, current Philadelphia Eagles in the NFL offensive line coach. 24/7. He's been at a game for 4 years. His last college job was Alabama, working from 2011 to 2012. So he worked with Jim McElwain there. Bama Online's Travis Ryer reports that Florida has reached out to Jeff Stoutland, but we not sure what the case or what happened there. It's not also clear if Stoutland would want to leave the NFL or not. And how much different it is there. NFL, you don't have to recruit. You have to recruit here in college. So would he want to join that part of it again and get back into the recruiting part of the job there? So Jeff Stoutland was the first name brought up there. A lot of people have kind of pointed to him as the kind of the go-to guy, I guess because of his history with Jim McElwain. I kind of want a guy with a little bit more college experience, but definitely would not be disappointed with that hire either. Second on the list, Jawan Sider, running backs coach at West Virginia. He's kind of come close to joining the Florida staff before. I think if you follow the message boards and Twitter, how much his name has been brought up a good bit. 24/7 reports there was mutual interest between the sides 2 years ago, but the timing was off with a health issue. Family health issue Sider had. So I think what you have to look for here, as I mentioned with Tim Skipper, is have to move him to the defensive side of the ball. Sider comes in and put him on the offensive side of the ball. He has great ties to recruiting in the state of Florida, and there has been interest before. So I know James Blackman, who reaffirmed his commitment to FSU, was a big fan of Jawan Sider. Mike could have done some more pull there if it wasn't West Virginia. Jawan Sider was pretty close to James Blackman. So I know there was some interest in Florida fans of getting Sider and maybe helping with Blackman in that area to go that. So, we'll see. I think that's probably one of my number one guys I think I would have to replace one of the open positions is getting Sider on the offensive side of the ball, but you still need an offensive line coach. So that kind of leads us to Rob Sell. Now the offensive line coach at Louisiana Monroe. He's had some SEC experience, played at LSU, worked with McElwain as an offensive analyst at Bama, and he was also Georgia's offensive line coach in 2015. So that would have been Mark Ricks last year, and Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator. And I know that Georgia offense kind of got slammed on a good bit. It was the year after Mike Bobo left, and I remember Georgia fans complaining about Mike Bobo. I don't think they've been complaining in the last 2 years. I think they'd have Mike Bobo back. So got off a little side topic there, but Rob Sale, I think it was a quote from Jim McElwain prior to the 2015 Georgia game. This was a quote from Jim McElwain. They brought in Rob Sale, who I think is one of the finest young offensive line coaches in the country, McElwain said back then. And the guy I was kind of angry they picked up, to be honest with you. So, the interest is there from Jim McElwain. I don't know if if the last 2 seasons that has changed Jim McElwain's opinion or not. I think that, of course, remains to be seen. But if they're looking for an offensive line coach, which of course they're going to be, Rob Sale, I think, would be high on that list. And credit to 24/7 here, GatorBait.net on here. I think Thomas Goldcamp put this list together. So sources have informed GatorBait.net that should Florida be interested, there may be some mutual interest from current Memphis offensive line coach Ryan Silverfield. Plenty of time as in the NFL, but he returned to college scene in 2016. To graduate at the Bowl School here in Jacksonville, so he's got ties to the state, of course, especially here in Northeast Florida, where he was the quarterbacks coach at Jacksonville University as well, and spent as well as spending 2 years as a graduate assistant at UCF. So he's pretty well known in the recruiting trail, they said, and pulled in an offensive line tackle, Obanaizi, I guess that's how you say it. I'm not really sure, but had offers from Auburn, Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, as well as Florida, and Silverfield was able to pull him in there. So that's the kind of the unknown name that would be, not a bad hire there for Florida. I think, Rob Sale, Juwan Sider. If they get Sider, they still basically need an offensive line coach, I think. So, of course, that's why, you move Skipper over to fit Sider in, but you still need an offensive line coach. So maybe they can get Sider and, one of Stoutland, Sale, Silverfield. I think that would be definitely a good combination. Florida would love to have right now after missing out on Mike Locksley. But who knows? There's, recruiting's going on right now. How desperate is Jim McElwain to find the offensive line replacement right now? Is he more dedicated to recruiting? We don't really know. Does he have a plan already in place? You would think if he had a plan already in place, that was deep in discussions, it would have kind of happened soon after the announcement of Summers leaving for Louisville. Summers leaving for Louisville was announced on Saturday. This podcast is being recorded on a Monday, so 2 days have passed where we haven't heard anything there. So I think Jim McElwain needs to make this hire soon, get another coach out there that these recruits will know. And it's probably tough for, pulling in recruits when they don't know who their position coach is going to be. But Florida doesn't necessarily recruit that way anyway, but I still think recruits would want to know who their assistant or who their, position coach is going to be. Florida recruits more by sending guys to certain territories, not sending position coaches to recruit their position. It's a much easier way to recruit that way, of course, like Randy Shannon being able to recruit South Florida, of course. So, you may send your position coach every now and then, but this close to the finish line for signing day, I think recruits want to know who their position coach is. So Gators Breakdown, episode 37, with this recruiting update and a kind of offensive line, offensive assistant coaching update, as well as Mike Summers heads to Louisville. So this has been episode 37 of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, at GatorDave_SEC, and you can find Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook. Just search Gators Breakdown, and you can find your audio podcast on SoundCloud and iTunes. So for Gators Breakdown, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys later on in the week.